The world watched, holding its breath, as the vast, snow-blanketed plains of Ukraine became the stage for a military drama unlike any seen in decades. Russia's grand offensive, once heralded as unstoppable, collapsed almost overnight, stunning both military analysts and ordinary citizens around the globe. Moscow's armored columns, which had long been symbols of Russian military might and intimidation, now sat stranded and helpless in the biting Ukrainian winter, their engines silent and their crews isolated. Engines silent, soldiers shivering in the sub-zero temperatures. This was not a defeat brought about by enemy fire or overwhelming force, but by something far more insidious: failed logistics and the merciless grip of winter. The fuel was gone. Supplies had vanished into the vast, frozen landscape. The offensive, which had been meticulously planned for months, was paralyzed before it truly began, leaving entire battalions immobilized and exposed. On paper, the plan was simple: overwhelm Ukraine with sheer numbers, firepower, and the shock of a rapid advance. The world expected a swift, decisive campaign, but this massive force, stretching for miles across the countryside, was fatally dependent on a long, fragile supply chain that snaked through hostile territory and treacherous weather. Ukraine, understanding the importance of logistics, targeted that chain relentlessly. Drones, artillery, and small sabotage teams struck supply convoys, fuel trucks and depots, turning the Russian advance into a logistical nightmare. The gamble on logistics was lost before the first major battle could even be fought. Russian supply vehicles lay broken and abandoned, their precious cargoes of fuel and ammunition scattered and useless. At first, Russian tanks advanced, churning up snow and mud as they pushed deeper into Ukraine. But with every mile gained, their supply lines grew more vulnerable, more stretched, and more exposed to attack. Fuel consumption soared as engines struggled against the cold. Vehicles broke down, mechanics worked frantically in the open, and the chain of support grew thinner and thinner. The trap snapped shut, not with a dramatic explosive battle but with a creeping paralysis. The Russian war machine, so formidable on paper, was rendered powerless by the simplest of needs: fuel, food, and warmth. Reports of fuel shortages trickled in, then multiplied, until entire units found themselves immobilized, unable to move forward or retreat, their radios crackling with desperate requests for resupply. The mighty spearhead sputtered, then stopped. What was meant to be a rapid thrust into the heart of Ukraine became a stationary target, vulnerable and exposed. The offensive ground to a halt, not by the firepower of Ukrainian tanks but by the cold reality of empty fuel tanks and exhausted soldiers. The Russian war machine was frozen in place, a silent, unmoving monument to failed planning and the unforgiving nature of winter warfare. The world saw not a battlefield defeat, but a logistical disaster unfolding in real time. News outlets broadcast images of abandoned convoys and demoralized troops, shattering the myth of Russian invincibility. Russia's military might, built on decades of investment and intimidation, was undone by the simplest need: keeping its engines running, its soldiers fed, and its columns moving. The offensive's collapse was swift, decisive, and humiliating. Vehicles were abandoned, equipment left behind, and soldiers forced to retreat or wait for rescue in the freezing cold. The lesson was clear and undeniable: in modern war, logistics is destiny. No matter how powerful the weapons or how numerous the troops, an army marches and fights on its stomach and its fuel. Russia's ambitions, so boldly declared at the outset, were left stranded in the snow, a stark warning to any nation that underestimates the complexity of modern warfare. The offensive was over before it truly began, its promise of swift victory buried beneath the snow and the weight of logistical failure. The world watched as the myth of Russian invincibility melted away, replaced by the harsh reality that even the mightiest armies can be brought low by the simplest of oversights. In the end, it was not the clash of titans that decided the fate of the offensive, but the quiet, relentless forces of winter, distance, and human error. The lesson would echo far beyond the frozen fields of Ukraine. Ukraine's answer to overwhelming Russian force was not to match it head-on, but to outthink and outmaneuver it. Instead of relying on sheer numbers or brute strength, Ukrainian commanders turned to precision, leveraging every ounce of intelligence and technology at their disposal. In the heart of winter, as the landscape froze and the world watched, Ukraine's strategy was forged in the crucible of necessity. Outnumbered and often outgunned, Ukrainian forces shifted their focus to the arteries that kept the Russian war machine alive: its fuel and supply routes. These convoys, snaking through icy roads and remote highways, became high-value targets, vulnerable to disruption far from the front lines. Ukrainian intelligence worked tirelessly, analyzing satellite imagery and intercepted communications to pinpoint the locations of vital refineries, sprawling railway hubs, and hidden depots deep inside Russian territory. Each target was carefully selected for maximum impact, aiming to cripple the enemy's ability to sustain its offensive. Long-range drones, silent and nearly invisible, became Ukraine's assassins in the sky. These unmanned aircraft could fly hundreds of miles, evading detection, and strike with surgical accuracy. Each mission was meticulously planned, with operators guiding their drones through darkness and danger to deliver devastating blows. Explosions shattered the silence of the night as refineries erupted in flames, and railway bridges collapsed in spectacular blasts. The glow of burning fuel and twisted metal lit up the winter sky, signaling another successful strike deep behind enemy lines. Each precision strike choked off another artery of Russia's war effort. Supply depots burned, transport infrastructure was left in ruins, and the steady flow of resources that once fueled the Russian advance began to falter. The flow of fuel slowed to a trickle. Supply lines that once seemed invincible broke down under the relentless pressure, leaving convoys stranded and cargo abandoned in the snow. Russian logistics, already stretched thin by the vast distances and harsh conditions, began to unravel. Scenes of confusion and frustration played out at logistics hubs, where supplies failed to arrive and vehicles sat idle, waiting for fuel that would never come. A single refinery hit in Ryazan meant less fuel for tanks and trucks across the front. A bridge destroyed near Rostov severed a critical transport link, forcing Russian planners to reroute and improvise, often with disastrous results. Ukraine's campaign was relentless. Day and night, drones launched from hidden bases, keeping constant pressure on Russian supply lines. There was no respite, no safe haven. Every hour brought the threat of another strike. No part of Russia's vast supply network was safe. From the refineries in the heartland to the railways snaking toward the front, every link in the chain was vulnerable. Maps filled with red pinpoints marked the relentless advance of Ukraine's precision campaign. The message was unmistakable. Every drop of fuel, every shipment of ammunition, every supply convoy was a potential target. Russia's lifeline was under constant threat, and nowhere was beyond reach. Russia's offensive began to bleed out, not in dramatic battles, but in 1,000 silent cuts. Tanks and vehicles were abandoned on frozen fields, their fuel tanks empty, their crews demoralized by the unseen enemy above. The systematic dismantling of Russian logistics became Ukraine's secret weapon. Each strike was part of a larger plan, a web of disruption that slowly strangled the enemy's ability to fight. The Russian offensive didn't end with a single, decisive battle. Instead, it died a slow death, suffocated by the relentless targeting of its supply lines. The once mighty advance ground to a halt, starved of the resources it needed to continue. In the end, it was Ukraine's precision and ingenuity that turned Russia's greatest strength, its vast resources and supply network, into its most crippling weakness. The war was not won by numbers, but by the silent strategic strikes that rewrote the rules of modern conflict. The front lines felt the collapse instantly. One moment, the advance was relentless. Then, in a heartbeat, everything changed. Soldiers who had been bracing for battle now found themselves facing a new, invisible enemy. The bitter cold and the creeping sense of dread as their momentum ground to a halt. Radio chatter turned frantic as commanders reported critical fuel shortages. Desperate voices crackled through the static, relaying the same grim message up and down the chain of command. The fuel trucks had not arrived, and the tanks were running on fumes. Tanks leading the charge ran dry, forced to halt in exposed fields. Their engines sputtered and died, leaving the steel giants vulnerable and motionless, easy targets for enemy artillery and drones. The offensive became a static, vulnerable traffic jam. Vehicles packed tightly together, unable to move forward or retreat, as the roads turned to rivers of mud beneath their treads. Soldiers abandoned multi-million-dollar vehicles, left to rust in the mud. With no way to refuel or repair them, these once-feared machines became little more than monuments to failure. Survival replaced fighting as the priority. Troops scavenged for warmth, huddling around makeshift fires, fashioning shelters from tarps and broken equipment, their weapons now secondary to the struggle against the elements. Fuel was siphoned from one vehicle to another, but it was never enough. Each desperate transfer bought only a few more minutes of movement, never enough to break free from the encroaching paralysis. Entire battalions were immobilized without a shot fired. The might of the armored columns was rendered useless, their crews left to wait and wonder if help would ever come. Ukrainian forces advanced, capturing abandoned equipment by the dozens. Each deserted tank and truck became a trophy, a testament to the invaders' logistical collapse. The image of farmers towing away Russian tanks became a symbol of defeat. Videos of tractors dragging away armored vehicles spread across the world, turning humiliation into a viral sensation and rallying the defenders' spirits. For Russian troops, the collapse was a nightmare. Stranded, exposed, and powerless, cut off from supplies, shivering in the open, they faced not only the enemy but also the unforgiving winter, and the crushing realization that their offensive had failed. The offensive dissolved into chaos, its power neutralized by empty gas tanks. What was meant to be a swift, overwhelming assault instead became a cautionary tale of overreach, poor planning, and the relentless grip of winter on the battlefield. The winter of 2026 was merciless. Without fuel, tank heaters failed, vehicles became iceboxes, frostbite and hypothermia struck more soldiers than enemy fire, mud swallowed trucks and tanks, trapping them forever. Soldiers struggled through knee-deep sludge, every step a battle. Food and ammunition ran out, medical supplies vanished, the support system crumbled, units were cut off, discipline broke down, soldiers looted abandoned vehicles for scraps, some deserted, risking capture or death in the cold. The front line became a collection of desperate, starving men. The offensive was no longer an army, but a scattered, freezing mob. Russia's grand assault had become a nightmare of mud and misery. With trucks stranded, Russia turned to the past. Horses and mules, requisitioned from farms, hauled supplies through mud and snow. Soldiers with assault rifles led mule trains loaded with ammunition. Horse-drawn carts replaced trucks behind the lines. It was slow, inefficient, and a stark symbol of failure. The army that prided itself on tanks now relied on beasts of burden. For soldiers, it was humiliating, a regression to their great-grandfather's war. The image of a soldier leading a mule said it all. Russia's modern army was broken. Ukraine's strikes weren't the only reason for collapse. Corruption was the silent killer. Fuel and supplies were stolen and sold at every step. Official records lied. What was promised never arrived. In peacetime, the system limped along. In war, it was fatal. Soldiers saw the theft, heard of officers living well while they starved. Trust and discipline evaporated. The army fought itself as much as the enemy. Even food, uniforms, and spare parts were stolen or sold. When pressure came, the hollowed-out system shattered. The crisis didn't stop at the front. It hit Russia's heartland. Drone strikes on refineries caused fuel shortages nationwide. Gas stations ran dry, prices soared, and daily life unraveled. Food and goods vanished from shelves. Farmers and truckers were paralyzed. The Kremlin prioritized the military, deepening civilian misery. Protests broke out as the social contract crumbled. Soldiers froze at the front. Families froze at home. The war's cost was now paid by everyone, not just the army. For Russian soldiers, cold and hunger broke morale completely. The original mission was forgotten. Survival was all that mattered. Betrayed by leaders, soldiers deserted or refused orders. The chain of command collapsed. Trust was gone. News from home, fuel shortages, protests, deepened despair. Propaganda rang hollow against the reality of failure. Even where supplies arrived, the will to fight had vanished. Russia's famed resilience was undone by futility and incompetence. The army became an armed mob, defeated from within. The offensive failed not just on the battlefield, but in the hearts of its own troops. The frozen offensive of 2026 was a turning point. Russia's ambitions crashed into the reality of empty fuel tanks. The defeat exposed deep systemic weaknesses, logistics, economy, trust. Thousands of vehicles were lost, not in battle, but abandoned. The Kremlin's image was shattered, the myth of invincibility destroyed. The war's true cost was felt at home, eroding the government's authority. In the end, Russia's dreams ran out of gas, its empire stalled by its own failures.